Hello, I'm Heinrich Himmler, and I would like to share my story with you. I was born on October 7, 1900, in Munich, Germany. My mother's name was Anna Maria Himmler, and she came from a devout Catholic family. I had two brothers, Gebhard Ludwig and Ernst Hermann, and we grew up in a comfortable, middle-class household. My father, Joseph Gebhard Himmler, was a successful schoolmaster who took great pride in his career. He collected lavish furnishings and paintings to adorn our home, and also collected old German coins and memorabilia. My grandfather had been a poverty-stricken soldier, but my mother's family had been successful tradespeople, and they had helped us to move into a spacious apartment in Munich. As children, my brothers and I received a strict upbringing that was intensified by our mother's religious beliefs and our father's occupation. We attended grammar school in Landshut, northeast of Munich, where our father was a joint schoolmaster. It was during this time that I developed an interest in Germanic heritage and history, possibly inspired by the town's castles and centuries, old buildings. My father encouraged my newfound fascination, and I became an obedient and devoted son. I was hardworking, methodical, and quiet, which was evident in the diary I began keeping in 1910. I listed my daily activities and referred to adults by their full name or title. I was proper, organized, and fastidious from an early age. As I grew older, my diary entries became more descriptive, but still centered around my hobbies of stamp collecting and attending church services. However, after the outbreak of First World War, I began to write about events and battles in the local press and letters my father received from his former student, Prince Heinrich, who had been badly wounded in action on the Western Front. During this period, I began to prepare myself to join the German army, which I did a few years later. I exercised regularly and lifted weights in an effort to gain muscle mass. During his school years, I wanted to appear as a strong and youthful German. However, I often suffered from regular colds, stomach pains, and other illnesses that caused me constant frustration and concern. I was a hard-working pupil who neither excelled nor failed at my subjects, including science, mathematics, history, geography, shorthand, Latin, Greek, and even piano lessons, which I had little natural talent for. After years of failure, I finally plucked up the courage to ask my parents to let me quit. In 1915, I began writing in my diary less frequently, and this may have been due to the death of my godfather, Prince Heinrich of Bavaria, in the mountains of Romania the following year. Although my father's and my reactions to the prince's death are not recorded, it is probable that we were greatly affected by it. In 1917, my father wrote to the Bavarian royal household asking for me to be considered as a future officer cadet, but not before I reached maturity. Meanwhile, I was called up for training with the 11th Bavarian Infantry Regiment in my mother's hometown of Regensburg. The next year, I continued my army training as a machine gunner and then as an officer. Despite my later claims of seeing action on the Western Front in First World War, records show that I never finished my army training before the end of hostilities. I was discharged in December 1918 without completing my officer training course. After the war, the German army was massively reduced in size due to the terms of the Versailles Treaty, and the country's economy had been decimated as a consequence of the war. This made it difficult for me to pursue a military career. Therefore, I sought employment on a farm as an apprentice near the city of Ingolstadt, where my father had taken a teaching position in 1919. However, I soon contracted paratyphoid fever caused by salmonella poisoning due to ingesting unclean meat or water. My doctor advised me to steer clear of farm work for at least a year, but I still wanted to pursue a career in farming. I enrolled in an agronomy course at the Technical University of Munich in October of 1919, where I studied crop and soil types until 1922. During this time, I even received the badge of honor that was a fencing scar to my face and joined a fencing fraternity. A large part of my time during this period was spent at a student society named the Apollo Club, consisting of ex-soldiers and top graduates, whose president was a Jewish man named Abraham Hofner. Although I was at first polite to the Society's Jewish members in public, it is clear that I had already formed strong anti-Semitic views, as I was involved in violent arguments protesting against their membership. That soon earned me a reputation as a nationalistic militarist myself. I was a methodical and traditional young man who took my studies and church-going seriously. I was proud of Germanic culture and traditions, but avoided intimate relationships with young women because I believed they should be protected from temptation. I even told my brother Gerhard that I planned to remain a virgin until marriage. However, everything changed for me on January 25, 1922. I attended a meeting of my rifle club, and by chance I met a man named Captain Ernst Röhm. He was one of the few officers that had been able to remain in the German army after the First World War. I found him to be friendly, and he expressed his pessimism about communism in Bavaria. This meeting with Captain Röhm was the first time that I became involved in organized nationalistic politics. After finishing my agricultural studies in August 1922, my brother and I joined Röhm's newly formed nationalistic paramilitary unit, the Bund Reiches Kriegsflagge, or Imperial Warflag Society. Despite being involved with Röhm and his paramilitary group, I still sought work after leaving college. As my studies had also covered chemistry, I soon got a job as a fertilizer laboratory assistant in the municipality of Schleißheim, about 10 miles north of Munich. This allowed me to continue my membership in the Reichskriegsflagge. It was around this time that I became aware of the growing influence of the Munich-based National Socialist German Workers' Party, led by a certain Adolf Hitler. His bombastic speeches in Munich's beer halls were attracting the admiration of local nationalists, including Ernst Röhm, and the hatred of the communists. Regular street battles broke out between the two groups. Support for the nationalists in Germany was growing due to the dire economic situation. Since 1923, the country's economy had been further damaged by hyperinflation caused by massive debts incurred from war reparations under the Versailles Treaty. The German government printed massive quantities of paper German marks to buy foreign currency, making the country's currency worthless. In 1922, the German government failed to pay one of their scheduled reparation installments to France, and as a result, the French government occupied the industrial rural region of Western Germany and seized large amounts of German industrial output, including coal. The German population desperately needed coal to heat their homes, but food prices such as bread skyrocketed due to hyperinflation. A loaf of bread in 1923 cost a staggering 200 billion marks. The dire situation in Germany benefited the nationalists and the communists, whose support was growing due to the increasing discontentment and unemployment, leading to yet more civil unrest and street fights. In my effort to strengthen our forces, we Bavarian nationalist societies, including Ernst Röhm's Reichskriegsflagge, agreed to transfer the power of our organizations to Adolf Hitler on September 25, 1923, forming the Camp Bond. This was after it became clear that the National Socialist Party was becoming the dominant force of the Bavarian right. I joined the party a month before Hitler's formal takeover of the separate right-wing paramilitary groups, although I still remained a member of Ernst Röhm's Reichskriegsflagge unit and thus a subordinate of Röhm. Together with the Reichskriegsflagge, I took part in Hitler's failed beer hall pitch attempt on November 8th and 9th, 1923. We, the National Socialists, the SA, and the Kambund attempted to seize control of the Bavarian government by capturing its leaders, including Gustav von Kahr, before marching on Berlin. Our plan was much in the same way that Hitler's hero Benito Mussolini had seized the Italian government with his march on Rome the year before. However, our attempt ultimately ended in failure. First World War General Erich Ludendorff, who had joined the push attempt alongside Hitler, released von Kahr and his allies from custody. After Hitler and his supporters attempted to march through Munich the following day to link up with Rom and me, the Reichskriegflag, we were met by government troops who opened fire on us and forced us to retreat. After attempting to go into hiding, Hitler was subsequently arrested and tried for high treason in February of 1924 and was given 5 years in prison at Landsberg, along with several other ringleaders of the push, including Rudolf Hess. In contrast, Ludendorff, who was still a war hero, was released without charge, whilst I, after being arrested, was released due to lack of evidence. Although my involvement in the putsch lost me my job, and as the Nazi Party and SA were now banned, I was forced to return home to my parents. However, I still maintained contact with Ernst Röhm, who'd been incarcerated himself at Stadelheim prison. I visited him in February 1924 on my motorcycle shortly before Röhm was released on probation, whilst Hitler, still at Landsberg, wrote his infamous autobiography and political doctrine, Mein Kampf. He then decided to seek power in Germany via peaceful means instead of revolution before being released on December 20th, 1924. Ernst Röhm, on the other hand, was now trying to reform paramilitary groups with a view to seizing power by force. This led to a rift growing between me and Hitler until, out of contempt for what I thought was weakness on his part, Röhm resigned from all his party commitments on May 1st, 1925, before traveling to Bolivia, where he took a position as an advisor to the country's armed forces. In contrast to Röhm, I had no intention of giving up my nationalist political activities. I refused to look for work during this period, much to my parents' displeasure, and instead became a campaigner for the newly formed National Socialist Freedom Movement, which was effectively the National Socialist Party under a different name. As it had been banned after the putsch, the party managed to secure 32 seats in the 1925 elections, half of which they would lose during another election within a matter of months. During my early days in the National Socialist Party, I travelled to different towns and villages to deliver speeches on the dangers of capitalism and the Jewish people. However, when my friend Ernst Röhm left Germany for Bolivia, I found myself without a powerful ally to help me make a name for myself. It wasn't until Hitler was released from Landsberg prison that the party gained new life and I rejoined on August 2, 1925. As a general assistant to Gregor and Otto Strasser, I became indispensable to the former. Otto Strasser even remarked how my motorbike made me doubly useful, allowing me to check on various arms dumps without being discovered by the government. In 1925, while assisting with the party organization in Lower Bavaria, I also helped to edit the party's local journal, in which I named and shamed all Jewish people living in Bavaria, along with those I believed to be their friends. This led some within the party to question whether I was becoming obsessed with the Jews, but Gregor Strasser defended me, saying that although I was ambitious, I was no world beater. Despite Strasser's reservations, my diligence eventually earned me a promotion to become his deputy within Bavaria. Around this time, I also joined a new bodyguard unit within the party known as the Schutzstaffel, or SS. The SS was initially formed as one of many personal bodyguard units for Hitler, who had wanted to create an elite protection squad from the ranks of the SA, the party's paramilitary arm. This was due to the many political assassinations that had taken place in Germany after First World War. The first iterations of these bodyguard units were short-lived, but the SS was reformed in March 1925 and eventually became known as the Protection Squadron. Despite being initially subordinate to the SAS, members saw themselves as an elite unit within the party. They wore caps with the Prussian Totenkopf skull and crossbones and field grey uniforms that set them apart from the brown-shirted SA members. Later, they adopted black German army style uniforms with peaked caps and polished boots, which would become their trademark and mark them as the elite force within Nazi Germany. I joined the SS eager to become a soldier and stand out. I was given the rank of SS Führer and the coveted membership number 168. In 1926, I was promoted within the SS under Joseph Berchtold, becoming a SS Hauptscharführer in Lower Bavaria. However, Birch soon resigned and was replaced by the young Erhard Haydn. I worked hard to prove myself as an ambitious and devoted member of the National Socialist Party, although I wasn't seen as having a particularly bright future like Joseph Goebbels. But I liked Himmler and thought he was intelligent and a good fellow. Until 1926, I was a mere functionary rather than a leader within the Nazi Party, as my salary was a modest 120 marks a month, and my SS duties largely consisted of canvassing members of the Bavarian public to subscribe to the party newspaper, as well as securing advertisements. In 1927, Gregor Strasser promoted me to become Deputy Propaganda Chief within Bavaria, in which role I worked closely with Joseph Goebbels. Hitler likely first noticed me during this period, since he was becoming an important figure within the party in Bavaria. In September 1927, Hitler held a meeting with me in which he told me his idea to turn the insignificant SS into the elite paramilitary unit of the National Socialist Party. Impressed, he promoted me to become Deputy SS leader under Erhard Haydn with the rank of SS Oberführer. Seeing an opportunity to outshine my superior, I initiated a reorganization of the SS and set up separate jurisdictions across Germany, quickly eclipsing and upstaging Erhard Haydn. In 1927, the Nazi Party began to expand its reach beyond Bavaria, resulting in my lecture tour in Berlin, where I met my future wife, Margrethe Boden, a nurse who owned a nursing home within Berlin. I formed a close bond with Margrethe, who was fastidious, hard-working, and shared my anti-Semitism. We married in July 1928, and the following year, our daughter Gudrun was born. Earlier that year, I experienced a significant career change. Due to my superior performance compared to Erhard Haydn's poor performance, Hitler dismissed Haydn as the leader of the SS and appointed me, a 28-year-old office clerk from Bavaria, as the senior group leader of the SS. Although I am known today as Reichsführer SS, I did not officially receive that title until 1934. However, I referred to myself as Reichsführer SS, or Realm Leader, since 1929. Despite the SS being smaller than the SA in 1929, my primary role of guarding top party officials gave me direct access to the very top of the National Socialist Party. Hitler had a vision to transform the SS into an elite Praetorian Guard-like force, and he approved of my plan from the beginning of my leadership. I saw my unit as the ideal Germanic warriors, whose loyalty, racial purity, physical fitness, and courage were unmatched. Meanwhile, Hitler, along with Hermann Goering and Joseph Goebbels, became one of the most high-profile political leaders within Germany, while I remained in the background, quietly accumulating power and expanding the membership of my SS from 300 in 1929 to 3,000 in 1930. During the early 1930s, Hitler's strategy of securing power via peaceful means was increasingly at odds with the SA leadership, who wanted to seize power by force, as they far outnumbered the German army. This groundswell of agitation caused Hitler problems, as he could not convince the German public, as well as the army in Parliament or Reichstag, that he was a viable leader, while his own party members were increasingly becoming a law unto themselves. The German Parliament was in a state of flux, and in 1930 the Social Democratic government fell largely as a result of disputes within the Reichstag over employer contributions of unemployment insurance. This led to an election being held in September in which the Social Democratic Party failed to win a majority, leading to Hitler's National Socialists securing the second largest number of seats with over 6 million votes. As I was a figure of some importance by this stage, I was selected to become a member or deputy of the German Parliament myself. However, Around the time of the 1930 election, a group of SA leaders led by Walter Stennis grew tired of Hitler's political campaigning and staged the Stennis Revolt. They issued a list of demands, including a resumption of street attacks on communists and Jews, as well as 3 places on the ballot paper for the upcoming elections. Hitler rejected these demands, telling us to get lost, which prompted the Berlin SA members to trash the party's regional headquarters. In response, I arrived in Berlin and took control of the situation in person, quelling the unrest. Hitler then sent a personal appeal to Ernst Röhm, who was still in Bolivia, who, after returning to Germany, took up his new position as Chief of Staff of the SA in January of 1931. As the loyalty of the SA came into question, my SS acted as bodyguards to all top Nazi officials and increasingly became the party's internal police force. Meanwhile, under Röhm's leadership, the SA became more militaristic and radical, which would put it at odds with the German army government and Adolf Hitler himself over the coming years. At the beginning of 1931, I began setting up a counterintelligence division of the SS. In 1932, I was just a member of the SS, but my career quickly took off when Adolf Hitler hired Reinhard Heydrich as head of the newly named SD, or Sicker. Under Heydrich's leadership, the SD became the espionage and surveillance arm of the SS. In 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany and sought total control of the country. The Reichstag caught fire in February of that year, which allowed Hitler to enact the Reichstag fire decree, suspending all basic civil rights and allowing detention without trial. This was followed by the Enabling Act, which gave Hitler de facto control over Germany for 4 years and enabled him to pass laws without Parliament's consent, making him the dictator of Germany. My own career within the SS also blossomed during this time, as the membership ballooned to over 500 members who were subject to strict entry rules involving ancestry, physical fitness, and height checks. I began to implement measures to ensure the purity of the SS membership, including setting up the SS Race and Settlement Main Office, which maintained high entry standard. In December of 1931, I gave the marriage order, which required SS members who sought to marry to produce a full family tree dating back to at least 1800, and those of sufficiently pure heritage were expected to parent as many children as possible to further increase Germany's Aryan stock. I also began to persecute those I considered to be of impure blood or enemies of the Nazi state. I set up the first concentration camps, such as Dachau, to hold those the Nazis wanted to contain, and they were now used by the new government to indefinitely detain and even execute political prisoners, including my former boss and leader of the SS, Erhard Hartheiden. The only obstacles remaining between Hitler and absolute power were Hindenburg, who was still technically his superior, and the Army High Command, who were increasingly voicing their concerns regarding the power of Ernst Röhm's massive SA. Back then, Hitler and some other Nazi leaders were worried that Ernst Röhm was going to seize power for himself. This concern grew because by 1933, the SA had become massive, with around 3 million men, which was much larger than the German army, which only had 1,000 soldiers. On top of that, Röhm was becoming more arrogant and disrespectful towards Hitler. He even said publicly that if there was no revolution, he'd be the one to start it. That's when Hermann Göring, who was the minister-president of Prussia at the time, formed a new covert branch of the police force called the Geheimstaatspolizei, or Gestapo. But Göring wasn't satisfied with his leadership skills and thought that someone more ruthless was needed to contain the SA. So, he reached an agreement with me, Himmler, in April of 1934 to hand over control of the Gestapo to me. I then placed it in Reinhard Heydrich's capable hand. As a reward for my efforts, Hitler put me in charge of all Germany's police forces outside of Prussia. This meant that I now had control over the protection of the Nazi elite, Germany's secret services, and most of the country's police forces. It's quite amazing to think that in under 5 years, I went from being a relatively unknown Nazi party clerk in Lower Bavaria to having control over most of the German state. However, there was still one threat to my position, the SA and the man who introduced me to the National Socialist movement, Ernst Röhm. By June of 1934, Hitler had already decided that Röhm and the SA leadership had to be eliminated. Thus, plans were set in motion with Hitler's approval for an operation called Hummingbird. Hermann Göring, Reinhard Heydrich, and I were in charge of the operation, which took place from June 30 to July 2, 1934. The SS carried out arrests throughout the country, leading to over 100 of Hitler's political enemies, including Ernst Röhm, being arrested and executed without trial. With the SA leadership eliminated, the door was wide open for my SS to expand its power even further across Germany. The year after the Night of the Long Knives, also known as Operation Hummingbird, in September of 1935, Hitler introduced the Nuremberg Laws. These laws forbade marriage between Jews and non-Jews across Germany and even deprived non-Aryans of German citizenship. This marked the beginning of a severe series of governmental measures designed to persecute non-Aryans that would eventually culminate in one of the most infamous periods of mass murder in human history. In June of 1936, Hitler decreed the unification of all state police forces within Germany, effectively making me the head of all state police forces. This meant that the SS controlled all of Germany's police forces and secret services. I then started the formation of a new fighting arm of the SS, which eventually became the infamous Waffen SS, or Armed SS. Its origins can be traced back to 1933, when the SS Underkommando was formed in Berlin under Sepp Dietrich. This unit initially acted as an elite bodyguard unit to Adolf Hitler, pledging allegiance and obedience to him until death. After the 10th anniversary of Hitler's beer hall putsch in 1933, this unit was renamed the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, effectively making it the furthest elite paramilitary bodyguard. In 1934, Hitler renamed my unit as the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. He wanted to make it clear that our unit was made up of SS members and was not part of the German armed forces. This change eventually led to the formation of the first of 38 Waffen SS divisions. Each division consisted of around 200 elite troops, many of which were from Germany's captured territories, including the 5th SS Panzer Viking Division, made up of men from Scandinavia, and the 13th Waffen Mountain Division, which consisted of Bosnians, Slavs, and Croatian. Other SS divisions included French, Belarusian, Flemish, Hungarian, Dutch, and Latvian troops, which gave the Waffen SS a total manpower of 9,000 men during World War II. The Waffen SS was also equipped with the latest German tanks, making the dreaded SS Panzer divisions among the most effective units of the entire Second World War. Their troops were among the most fanatical and loyal that Hitler's SS had to offer. However, despite their fighting prowess, the Waffen SS committed numerous war crimes during World War II in countries such as Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. For example, the 2nd SS Panzer Division massacred 642 French civilians, including women and children, in the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region of France in the Oradour-Sur. Glaine massacre and 80 Allied prisoners of war were shot by men from the SS in the Wormhout massacre of May 1940. As the head of Nazi Germany's police and intelligence services, I am well known for my leadership in these areas. However, a lesser-known aspect of my character is my fascination with Nordic mythology. I was interested in finding ancient relics and evidence of the existence of pagan Germanic cultures before the spread of Christianity, which I believed was a threat to the morality of the German-speaking people. I approved a wide array of projects and expeditions, including sending German scientists to Japan to ascertain if there were any geological links between the Asian and Germanic people. I also sought evidence from archaeological and research projects across Europe and beyond in an attempt to prove the superiority of the Aryan race. Historians have summarized that it was my intention to replace Christianity altogether in Germany because Jesus was a Jew. This replacement of Christianity was also manifested in the SS itself, by our members being required to renounce their faith for the new SSB pseudo-religion. This religion consisted of replacing Christmas with winter solstice festivals and changing Christian weddings to pagan ceremonies that I myself devised. In 1933, I bought a castle in Wewelsburg that I initially intended to become an SS training center. However, I soon had it made into a venue for hosting SS dinners and pagan ceremonies. An example of my reverence for Nordic history and mythology is the SS logo itself, which was designed by an SS graphic designer named Walter Heck in 1933. The logo consisted of two Scandinavian siege runes that originally represented the sun. However, in 19th century Germany, these runes were interpreted to mean victory, as the German word for victory is siege. Therefore, the infamous SS logo not only stands for Schutzstaffel, but is also supposed to mean victory. I adopted the cry of Sieg Heil during Hitler's rallies, where the masses would give the Nazi salute and cry Sieg Heil, meaning victory hail. As First World War II approached, Hitler annexed Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, and to ensure their subjugation, special units were formed consisting of SS and Gestapo operatives. They were called Einsatzkommando and were tasked with arresting anyone deemed a threat to the new order, securing public buildings, and bringing local police forces under their control. These units were usually under the control of my right-hand man, Reinhard Heydrich, and would later form the dreaded Einsatz group, tasked with hunting down and eliminating resistance groups and Jews. Unfortunately, many people were deemed a threat by the Nazis during World War II, resulting in massacres such as Baby Yar in September 1941, where the SS executed some 33,000 Jews in Ukraine, along with numerous other mass killings in the Baltic states and the Soviet Union itself. We know about these massacres because a detailed SS report was found after the war, sent by the commander of Einsatz Group in January 1942 to Reinhard Heydrich. The report detailed the number of Jews killed by his unit since the start of the German invasion, and even included a map listing the exact number of Jews killed in each of the Baltic states, totaling over 220,000 men, women, and children. The total number of Jews estimated to have been killed by SS Einsatz Group and death squads during World War II between 1941 and 1945 is around 1.3 million, often involving women and children being shot at point-blank range. However, the logistics of exterminating the Jews using these methods combined with the psychological effects on SS soldiers soon prompted me and Heydrich to turn the extermination into a modern industrialized process. As the borders of Hitler's Third Reich expanded, so did the responsibilities of my SS organization. We were responsible for policing the interior of the Third Reich, and as entire nations, such as France, were brought under Nazi jurisdiction, the number of SS personnel grew. In order to cope with the challenge, we turned to industrialization. After failing to invade Britain in 1940, Hitler ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union the following year with Operation Barbarossa, which was designed to eradicate what Hitler and I saw as the Bolshevik Jewish Soviet Union and create Lebensraum, or living space, for the ethnic Germans. This started the Germanization of Eastern Europe, laying the foundations for the so-called Thousand-Year Reich. Before the invasion, I was given the responsibility of preparing the SS for Operation Barbarossa, tasked with bringing the Eastern territories under Nazi administration. However, after the outbreak of hostilities, the SS were overwhelmed with as many as 6 million Soviet prisoners of war. Half of them were shot, gassed, or starved to death by the Germans in direct contravention of the Geneva Convention. Up until 1945, the massive numbers of prisoners presented me and the SS with a huge problem. To contain the huge numbers of people now under our charge, we walled off areas of inner cities in Poland and populated them with the country's Jews. The most famous of these ghettos were the Warsaw and Krakow ghettos. As I considered options for the Jewish question, I traveled to Minsk in August of 1941 to witness the executions of Jews. Watching the firing and corpses being dropped into graves deeply affected me. My chief of staff, Karl Wolff, later commented that I was trembling and visibly disturbed. I ran my hand across my face and swayed, feeling sick to my stomach. I had vomited and complained about a piece of brain splattering on my face. I then ordered my subordinates to come up with a less gruesome means of mass execution than just shooting people. This led to experiments being conducted where Jews were killed in sealed vans using exhaust gases. However, these experiments were inefficient, so I ordered plans to be drawn up in early 1942 for gas chambers to be added to existing concentration camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau in southern Poland. My deputy, Reinhard Heydrich, formulated these plans and summoned Nazi Party officials to attend a conference on January 20, 1942, where he outlined our plan for the so-called total solution of the Jewish question. At the conference, we discussed the estimated number of Jews who were expected to be killed, which totaled around 11 million, along with criteria for who was considered Jewish or not. However, we used evasive language to describe the fate of the Jews as evacuation rather than extermination. By the spring of 1942, plans for the final solution had been finalized and were ready to be put into effect. After Heydrich's death, I took personal command of the final solution with his deputy, Adolf Eichmann. We escalated the operation in the so-called Operation Reinhardt, named in Heydrich's honor between 1941 and 1943. During this operation, around 2 million of Poland's Jews were exterminated at purpose, built camps such as Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. The most notorious of these camps was Auschwitz, which I ordered to be expanded in early 1942, with the addition of gas chambers and furnaces where Jews, Roman, Gypsies, homosexuals, and all those deemed it undesirable by the Nazis were killed using Zyklon B pesticide, and their bodies were incinerated. Though few documents remain that specifically relate to the Nazi extermination of the Jews, perhaps the most damning piece of evidence is my own words about the matter. On October 4th, 1943, I held a secret meeting with SS officers in the Polish city of Poznan. During the meeting, I made it clear that the evacuation of Jews, as outlined at the Wannsee Conference in 1942, actually meant their extermination. Some have disputed the authenticity of an audio recording of this meeting, but later recordings of separate speeches I made in 1944 confirm that it was indeed my voice in the Poznan speeches. This provides conclusive evidence that the persecution of Jews and implementation of the final solution did take place. Other evidence supporting this conclusion includes testimony from my Chief of Staff, Karl Wolff, Adolf Eichmann, Isaac's grouping reports, and thousands of eyewitness accounts. Joseph Gerber's diary entry on October 9, 1943, also confirms my belief that the Jewish question could be solved by exterminating them, which is a consistent solution. By 1944, it was clear that Hitler's attempt to secure European domination had failed. As a result, he ordered the creation of new army units consisting of every able-bodied man the German state could muster. This resulted in him finally realizing his childhood dream of becoming a soldier by being appointed as commander of Upper Rhine High in the winter of 1944. He also ordered me to create the Volkssturm units, which were little more than armed civilians or militia, in the desperate hope of holding back the advancing Allied and Soviet forces. Unfortunately, these units largely consisted of teenagers and pensioners who were ill-equipped and unable to offer much resistance. As the Third Reich began to crumble, I attempted to initiate peace negotiations through Swedish representatives by arranging for the release of 200 Jews to Scandinavia. Later, on April 23, 1945, I met with Count Bernadotte, head of the Swedish Red Cross, and sent a written proposal to the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, Dwight D. Eisenhower, offering Germany's surrender to the Western Allies. However, the offer was promptly refused. On April 28, 1945, the British Broadcasting Corporation broadcast my peace offer, which led to Hitler discovering my betrayal. He stripped me of all my offices and titles and issued a warrant for my arrest before committing suicide on April 30th. As Berlin had capitulated and most of Germany was overrun, I sought to go into hiding by masquerading as an ordinary German soldier. However, I was eventually detained at a checkpoint by former Soviet prisoners of war and spent several days in internment camps before being brought to a British civilian interrogation center near Leonberg. I was interviewed on May 23rd and I decided to openly admit who I was. As a result, I was transferred to the British Second Army headquarters in Leonberg, where a doctor began to examine me. However, when the physician tried to look inside my mouth, I resisted, and a few moments later I collapsed onto the floor. Despite efforts to revive me, I died 15 minutes later from biting a potassium cyanide capsule. Shortly after my death, my body was buried in an unmarked grave near Leonberg, and to this day, the location remains a mystery. In my 44 years of life, I went from being a dutiful son of a school teacher to becoming the head of all police and security services in Nazi Germany. Eventually, I became one of the architects of the largest mass killings in human history. Despite my unassuming and quiet manner, many believe that I masterminded the details and implementation of the Holocaust. Although my actions are shocking and horrifying, it is crucial that we remember about my life as well as the details of the final solution. In all its appalling detail, if we forget the mistakes of history, we are doomed to repeat them.